Moving on, communications. So what happens here is the frequency of the communication. We have a lot of feedback coming from the customers in case of agile mindset. So in this case, what happens? The people are motivated to come forward to listen to what my customer has to say. But here in the traditional mindset, communication is predefined in one particular forum only. Right. So the people learn about the project status only in the project status meetings or in the high level review meetings, which involves a lot of people. There is only one way communication encouraged a lot here. But in the agile mindset, in every scrum meeting or in every sprint, the customer is also allowed to come and participate, right? So you can see the difference in the mindset here. Similarly, in the traditional mindset, the hierarchy is followed in the communications. So a project manager or the functional manager talks to the HOD, the head of the department, and then the head of the department talks to the managers, and then manager speaks to the deputy manager, deputy speaks with the associate manager speaks with the assistant manager. This very long hierarchy is followed in the communication. Because of this, there is a loss of what we want to actually deliver. And here in the agile mindset, what happens is everybody who's in the working team, they are allowed to directly speak to the product owner. Product owner is usually a senior person who has connections with all these higher managers. That means we only have to update to this product owner who is already an expert, right? Who is already a source of all the information technically, right? So we have a direct communication from a person who is expert or who is aware of all the project updates, and then the communication happens both ways. Here, as I mentioned, already covered, it flows only through desired channels. You are not allowed to speak to the functional manager of a cross-functional team. But here, it's not like that. Many people from many team members, they come forward, and then the exchange of information happens in every possible direction. Here, the flow of information is sometimes also controlled. So some people are not allowed to send emails to somebody. The design information is not accessible to the person who is doing the purchasing activity. Sometimes the purchasers don't even have access to the design tools. So there is quite restrictive control. But here, every related or every project related document is saved in a common drive, which is accessible to everybody. So there is no restriction for a R&D person to look at the quality documents or for a quality person to look at the procurement documents. Every document must be saved and stored in a transparent location. Moving on to the risk. So what happens here is when we keep on repeating about the high variability, highly dynamic environment, this actually calls for a lot of uncertainty. A lot of uncertainty means there is a lot of risk. So that is the reason the agile mindset also gives a solution to it by frequently reviewing these processes. So every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, we have a review of the tasks that are done. But in case of traditional mindset, these reviews are not quite often seen, right? So whatever is the task that the person is assigned to, he is doing that for his lifetime, right? So there is no review mechanism happening. Of course, the review happens when we have salary hikes or something like that. But here in the agile mindset, the people have to continuously face the reviews every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks. Whenever the sprint ends, we have to answer the status of the project, why we have done something to close a task in a particular way. Right? It is all public. We have to be quite open and we have to give reason for every closure. We have to create stories, if you remember. So all these processes, what these are actually the reviews. So these reviews happen quite frequently. So in the agile mindset, the risk is controlled much better. Similarly, in the traditional mindset, the risk identification and mitigation is done in a predictive way. Whereas in the agile mindset, the cross-functional team, they propagate the knowledge from multiple points of view. Thereby multiple points of problems or solving the problem is done. So risk mitigation is much better here. Here the risks are listed only at very set, very predefined times, and only in those review sessions the risks are assessed. But here, each and every iteration, each and every sprint, we have a risk review. Here, the scope of work is unaffected by the risk assessment because the risk assessment is done at such point of time. But here, if we see a potential risk, all our priorities of the next sprint are going to change. We are going to adapt to the complete working style to address that risk first. So here we keep on working with that risk. Some risks keep turning into issues, but still our way of working continues to be in that direction. But in agile mindset, it's not like that. We completely change and adapt our working styles based on the risks that we identify. Moving on, procurement. So what happens here is that in agile environments, specific sellers may be used to extend the team, right? So in the agile team meetings, the sellers are also part of the project. So they are also considered as one of the stakeholders. When I say sellers, the suppliers, the vendors, the service providers, everybody. But here in the traditional way of working, the vendors, they are not part of the project meeting updates. They are considered to be somebody who's outside of our organization. Here in the agile mindset, whatever risk is identified, whatever problems we discussed, they are, the risk is actually shared between both the purchaser and the seller. But here, when there is a problem that is related to the part, even though the buyer company is responsible for the problem, the vendors are penalized, right? When I say penalized, even when we as a buying organization accept the problem, the part sorting techniques or the correction activities, all these activities, they are thrown towards the vendor to be done. So here it's not like that. The risk and the work is shared equally between buyers and sellers. Here in the traditional way, the vendors working methods, the organization doesn't give much importance to. But in the agile way of working, the agile sprints and all, they are propagated or they are shared with the vendors as well. So the inclusion of adaptive working styles happens also with the vendors. In the traditional way, the complete procurement process happens purely in traditional approach, but here a mix of traditional plus agile approach happens. Moving on, stakeholder management. Here, the direct engagement with the stakeholders happens with multiple functions in multiple scrum meetings, right? But here in the traditional way, what happens is there are set of rules, right? You are not, the designer is not allowed to go and meet the person who is doing the controlling activity. So the HR is not allowed to meet the finance. So the logistics person is not allowed to meet the quality guy. Such rules are already set in the traditional mindset. In the traditional mindset, again, restrictive updates only to certain group of people. The updates, whatever are given, they are targeted only to certain set of people. But what happens in the agile mindset, we have already learned this a lot of times. The communication happens in the cross-functional way. So the information is available irrespective of the function there. In that meeting, whoever speaks, everybody else listens to it. So again, in the traditional mindset, we have independent working styles and independent working way of stakeholders. But here, because we are coming forward for a common cause, the other's working style might get adopted to somebody else's working style because that person is dealing with a more dangerous risk than us. So everybody's working style gets adapted to that one serious problem that the company is dealing with. When I say company, that one person who is working for that company. Similarly, here all the misalignments and miscommunications, they are easily cleared out because people meet every day, right? People meet every day, people talk every day. Any sort of miscommunication, even if somebody has not listened to that update one day, the next day when he pays some attention to that same topic, he will understand, okay, that there is something moving in one particular direction only. But here, the communications happen only within those teams. The cross-functional talking happens very rarely. Right? So separate communication is given, separate updates are given to each and every stakeholders. That is why there is a separation of information in the traditional mindset.